recording. Good evening and welcome to MC Live, a monthly gathering of the National Ministers Council. We're so glad that each and every one of you is here this evening. My name is Jackie Belisle, and I serve in Chicago as well as on the national leadership team. And we're excited tonight to have the topic before us of celebrating and nurturing together in ministry groups. You'll hear more about other programs of MC Live, previous ones and upcoming ones, later in the hour during the announcements. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this evening's session as we always do to make it as available as possible for people who aren't able to join us in person. Just wanted to let you know that, and if you prefer to not be recorded, of course, please participate with your video off or your sound off and follow along in connection in that way. Before I turn to formal introductions, I would like to just read these brief lines from the opening of the present draft, revised text of our National Code of Ethics, to kind of ground us for this topic, the sake of this topic. This is from the early preamble about our covenant as ministers, and then the first lines about centeredness. When needed, I will seek out best practices from others and share my guidance when it might edify and empower wise choices for others. As further affirmation of my commitment, I covenant with my colleagues in ministry that we will hold one another accountable for fulfillment of all the public actions set forth below in the Code of Ethics. And then the centeredness section. I will grow in and show my personal love for God as revealed in Jesus Christ in my life and ministry, as I strive together with my colleagues to preserve the dignity, maintain the discipline, and promote the integrity of the vocation to which we have been called. We're so glad, friends, to welcome tonight to lead our conversation, Reverend Lynn Story Bunce, and Reverend Dan Hopkins. Lynn is the newest member to our national leadership team and has been preparing and planning to shepherd our Together in Ministry program in the upcoming months. Dan, our veteran, her predecessor in that role. Together they'll share the opportunity for each of us to connect with our experience and our questions and our needs around this topic. And so I want to just go ahead and turn it to Lynn now.
Thank you, Jackie. I am so grateful to be here with you all. I'm so grateful to be part of the Ministers Council and of this leadership team. It is a phenomenal group of human beings with whom I am journeying and learning so much from. And so being part of Together in Ministries is just a natural part of where I have been coming. And I didn't even know it until I got the call from Randy Miller to join the team. And so a little schedule for tonight, I'm going to do a brief introduction just for you to who I am and how I got here. I'm going to invite some clergy, some really wise ministers to share their experience in small groups, what they've gained from being part of small groups and some of the wisdom that they have to offer for those who are interested or are part of small groups and looking for some more kind of best practices. I'm going to just share with you a little bit of info. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in studies, but just so that you understand why Together in Ministries is so important to the Ministers Council. And then I'm going to open it up for questions and answers. So any questions that you have that folks here who have been part of a group could answer for you, that Randy or Jackie or I could answer if you're interested in applying to be part of a group. So that's kind of how tonight will go. I have some really wise, wonderful people that you probably know who have joined us tonight. I've asked Reverend Rick Kessler and Reverend Carol McVetti and Reverend Dan Hopkins to join us tonight with their wisdom. Reverend Rick Kessler grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and though he was not raised in the church, came to an intentional spirituality when he was about 30. He was ordained in Columbus in '94 and worked for churches in Columbus and Cleveland before accepting the call to South Church in Mount Prospect, where he's been for the last 13 years. Reverend Carol McVetti began ministry at a small church in upstate New York. She and her husband then co-pastored First Baptist Church of Detroit, this wonderfully diverse congregation. And she recently retired after 20 years on the pastoral team of North Shore Baptist in Chicago as their English language pastor. We are grateful that she is stepping back out of retirement with us tonight to join us with her daughter, with whom she's visiting. And Reverend Dan Hopkins, if you've been part of the Ministers' Council or connected to Together in Ministries, then you know him. He is the former national coordinator of Together in Ministry through the Ministers' Council and currently serves as the senior pastor at First Baptist Church in Tell City, Indiana. Of course, Jackie and Randy, thank you so much. You all know them and we're grateful for this opportunity. And of course, they are full of wisdom as well and can share with you questions that you might have. A little bit about me. I am in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I pastor, I'm the associate pastor of this really wonderfully thoughtful congregation right across the street from UNCG. And I've been there now for 11 years, and it is my first actual placement after seminary, which is not typical. I can tell you that most of my seminary friends who graduated with me have moved on to other congregations, most of them for positive reasons. But I have found myself still in this wonderful congregation where I started right after seminary. And when I first graduated from Wake Forest, a couple of things happened. I experienced what I imagine is the same shelter shock that most seminary students feel after being immersed in this closed, wonderful, like-minded community of colleagues. I found myself having to find my voice again within a community of people who somewhat knew me, but also now was assuming a full-time role of ministry. I found myself having to find my place in an established ministerial staff, learning what it takes to run behind the scenes programs of churches while also sitting in some of the most difficult conversations and decision makings that happen in churches that they don't tell you about all the time in seminary. I was 100% overwhelmed mentally, spiritually, personally, and emotionally. The kind of emotional toll that, if carried alone, is what I imagine leads to such a high percentage of turnover in the first 5 years after seminary. According to a 2007 Duke study, 85% of pastors will leave their churches within the first 5 years and not go back to ministry. And 90% don't make it to retirement. However, what also happened for me is that by some luck, I had made this wonderful group of friends who stayed connected with me and had professors who were invested not just in my education, but in my personhood and in my ministerial self. And so as I came out of seminary, I stayed connected to this group of people. I also lucked into a program that I think was connected to the Thriving in Ministry grants, the first round that came out. And it's provided me with the first intentional small group support that I had, and most importantly, my first spiritual coach. Because of the amount of support and life that I found, I became an advocate to every seminary graduate to continue to foster relationships with groups of people that you can journey with, and to find a spiritual coach. And if it's not in your budget when you take a job, you put it in your budget when you take the job. Those were kind of my little nuggets of wisdom that I had gained from these experiences. These experiences taught me how to listen to my own voice and my body, how to be a good colleague to other people, how to trust my instincts, to balance my life within and outside of ministry, and how to better know what helps me to thrive and to flourish. Since I've been part of that group, I've now been part of about 7 small groups, some short-term, some long-term, some intentional, and some that are organic. I've served in a number of roles similar to this, and support of other covenant clergy groups, and I've maintained regular connection with the same spiritual coach that I first found in my year after seminary. These kinds of supports and accountability, creativity and encouragement and insight, I know has not only enhanced my own understanding of ministry, but has also benefited my communities with whom I have been in ministry. So I am thrilled now to be able to bring that to Together in Ministry groups. This is something that I have a lot of passion about, the health and the wellness of clergy, but also making sure that they feel supported, and is something that I know is a passion of the Ministers' Council. And so I am so grateful that this is not only my story, but is also the story of many that are gathered here. And so I would like to lean on the wisdom of those that I've asked to be here. And I'm going to ask if Reverend Carol McVetti would begin by sharing some of her experiences with being part of small group, what that's meant for her, and some of the best things that have come out of that.
Well, thank you, Lynn. I am happy that you invited me, and I know that this is kind of a follow-up on a conversation that I had with Jackie Belisle, and I'm not sure exactly what that. I mean, it was a ministers' council thing of some kind, right? But I mean, I'm happy that you've invited me, because these kinds of groups, have, just like you, they've made such a difference in my life and my ministry. And like you, Lynn, I've been in any number of small groups that have nourished my, my growth and my spirit, and my ministry. And some of them were short, some of them were long-term, some of them were covenant groups, and some weren't. I was for a number of years in an official Together in Ministry group in Chicago, and the resource person for that group was Jackie Belisle. It was a group of women, and it was really focused on spiritual nurture and intimate conversation, and fun and silliness, and we really just fed each other's spirits for a long time, for a number of years, and that was very life-giving. And I know that that for me, with all of the challenges of ministry, that just having a place to go where you can be yourself completely, be completely honest and completely known, and encouraged, and receive wisdom from each other, it's so important. But there was another earlier clergy colleague group that I was a part of, that had a really profound impact on me. And this goes back a number of years to it would be the mid 1980s, up through the mid 90s, when Doug and my husband and I were in Detroit at the First Baptist Church of Detroit, and we were invited to be a part of a case study group. And some of the people here that are more of my generation might recognize the two names of the people that organized that group: Joe Cutter and Harold Hoffman. Both now gone on to their reward, but wonderful, wonderful American Baptist clergy leaders. And we received an invitation from them to be a part of a case study group that met, again, I believe that it was, 8 or 9 years. We met monthly. We used a case study approach, a particular case study method that was developed by the American Academy of Clergy. And I went on their website some time ago, like within the last year or two, and could not find anything about that case study method. It was published in a book called Putting It Together in the Parish. And again, this like goes back to the 70s or something. But we met once a month. We did a case in the morning, then we had lunch and conversation together for an hour, then we did another case in the afternoon. And that case study method allows you to wrestle with the actual work that you're doing in pastoral ministry, and pulls out a particular event of ministry. And it's kind of like with this group of wise people, you have a disciplined process by which you kind of walk around and examine this piece of ministry to see what you can learn about it and from it, and what kind of help you might be able to offer the presenter who has brought it to the group. And that formed me as a pastor. That experience of being with colleagues who, most of whom were a great deal older and more experienced than me. In some later parts of my ministry, I said that I felt as though I got the equivalent of a D-Min in the years that I'd spent in that case study group, because it was so disciplined and so challenging and rewarding. But also because of the setup and having the informal 1 hour for lunch in the middle of each gathering, we just got to be wonderful friends who encouraged and supported each other as well. So, that memory lingered with me through all of my time in ministry in Chicago. But in the midst of pastoral ministry, you usually just feel too slammed to organize anything. I just never, even though I kind of longed for that kind of discipline and all, again, I just was always way too overwhelmed to even consider trying to put a group together. But eventually then kind of filed it away and said, that's something I'm going to do when I retire. So after I retired from North Shore, I did put together a case study group that has, and the one that I put together in retirement is all women of varying kind of ages and experience levels, although most of the women are young women early in ministry. And we have been meeting now for about 1.5 years. And of course, most of our time now has been meeting over Zoom. And I'm still just really very nourished and fed by my time with that group. And it's been really rewarding for me to have introduced this case study method to a group of young women.
That's really wonderful. I would love to hear more about that, and how that is shaping for them to have that experience so early in their ministry too. And then how that will evolve in their retirement as they offer that to someone else. What a legacy.
Yeah. Well, and this case study method is, it is transferable. It is in writing, it's written up, and I feel like groups can learn it. I think it helps to have somebody there who has some experience with it initially, but it's something that a group can learn and gain practice with and put into effect.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. Reverend Rick Kessler, if you wouldn't mind sharing your experiences with us also.
There we go. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. Hello, everyone. And before I go on personally, I'd like to say hello to Laura, who I have not seen for a long time, but I hear about you frequently, and I'm glad you're doing well. And Lynn, I just wanted to thank you for getting in touch, and it's been a pleasure being in communication with you. Something just told me to say that. Yeah, I've been at the South Church. It's a church in the northwest suburbs of Chicagoland. I've been here for about 13 years, almost exactly. And I don't recall exactly whether it was during the end of my first year or somewhere in my second year here, but somewhere back probably around 2009 or 10. Got a call from the executive minister at the time, Larry Greenfield, asked me if I'd be interested in getting together with a clergy group, said it was going to be all male. And he said one of the criteria that he was using to pull people together were churches and pastors that were on the somewhat progressive / liberal side of things in terms of Christian world. And I'd met some of the people in the area, but I don't get to nearly as many denominational meetings as I should. And I thought the way he described this, it sounded like something that would benefit me. I was also skeptical because, you know, our time is precious, and I was working for the busiest church I'd ever worked for, and I was extremely, you know, being pulled in many directions at the same time, all the time, which I know you guys understand. But it was much more drastic than in my previous pastoral experiences. So I wasn't sure I had time or could make the time or wanted to stay with the commitment, but I thought I'd give it a try. And it turns out that this group was also being started by a fellow clergyman in the area. And one of his goals, because all the women clergy that he knew were members of one or more female groups. And he just woke up one day and said, well, heck, I think maybe I could use a male group somewhere, and I don't have one. So that was one of the founding spirits of the group that I'm part of, was that it was going to be for men. So I start going, and I immediately find myself very comfortable with most of the people there. And those that I wasn't immediately comfortable with, I was very interested to get to know better. And I've jotted down some notes, and I'm going to stick with them so I don't wander too far. But so I just may skip from one note to the next, but I'm trying to cover a lot of ground because this group has been incredibly important to my life and my ministry. And I'll tell you maybe a little bit more detail about that as I go along. I think our group has been successful because we had a very sort of loving presence in our leader. He doesn't have to lead too much. He kind of, you know, sends out emails and keeps the conversation going. But he has such a wonderful way of doing that. And so among the things in the tone that he said at the beginning were that this was going to be a time of personal sharing. We didn't have an objective. We weren't going to do anything like a case study. We were going to hang out, talk about what it was like to be in whatever jobs we were in. We were going to share problem-solving ideas if that came up. I've become certified as a spiritual director, and I look back on how we began, and it was very much like a group spiritual direction experience. And by that, I mean, we weren't necessarily trying to solve everybody's problems, and people brought problems to the table and challenges to the table right away. We were there more to help people talk about them, to draw them out, to let them have a safe space to vent, to share whatever the hell they wanted to get off their chests. And that has been a precious, precious space for everybody who's been part of that group at some time, to be able to say whatever they needed to say and trust that it was okay. Somehow, some of us really learned early that we would benefit more from the group the more vulnerable we became. And I don't know, I can be very vulnerable in certain spaces and, you know, very guarded in others, I'm sure, like most of us. But this is the probably most vulnerable I've ever allowed myself to be in a group, especially a group of men. I was going to begin by contrasting this with other small group experiences or clergy groups I've been part of, and I have nothing against them, and they've all served purposes, but they really had, you know, denominational business kind of oriented purposes, and this group did not. And that was part of what made it work. We had very little structure. We never had an agenda written out or sent out in an email in the entire time we've gotten together. And I think we've managed to hang out together now for over 10 years, some of us. 3 people who were part of the first group are still members of the group. The rest have left and new people have come in. The word that really jumped out at me, and this has to do with some sermon work I'm doing and some other stuff I'm doing, was that this group was totally non-performative. In other words, I don't know about you, but I've hardly ever been part of a clergy group where there wasn't some competition. And it usually started as soon as somebody said, well, I hope this isn't a competitive group. And eventually it becomes one in some way or another. And I'm, not just male groups or not just female groups, just clergy groups in general. And it's hard not to, as we talk about our churches and we struggle and we compare each other with the people down the street and that sort of thing. But this group, we were really encouraged to just share our personhood. And I know we talk in our theology a lot about being seen by God and how wonderful it is to know that we can be seen and loved by God. But that process became embodied in this group and still is. So we were much more concerned about who we were as people than we were as who we were as pastors, even though being pastors was a large piece of the conversation. So I talk about my cats, I talk about my spouse, I talk about people in the neighborhood, I talk about the kids that come and visit us at Halloween. There's no end to the things that we shared with each other, and we'd always circle back to church, and we'd always come back to problem solving if we could. But we really, really shared from our personal lives, and I know so much more. I know so much about the lives of the men that I've sat with in this group as a result. But that concept that it was non-performative and that we really weren't trying to impress people, and that we could sort of leave a lot of our personality and egos at the door and be vulnerable has been critical to this group. I think some people that we've invited to join over the years have come and sensed that and not come back as a result. We sometimes ask, well, why do you think so-and-so didn't come back after we invited them? Because we're very careful about who we invite. And that's often what we come up with, and we don't really know. So we're projecting our possible answers here, but it's very likely that they weren't looking for this sort of group, and that's fine. But we weren't going to solve the world's problems or tell people how to run a church, but we were going to try to grow together spiritually and somewhat humbly every now and then. I think I want to stress that in this group, there's this really cool tension between the fact that we come in and we don't assume that people are going to solve our problems when we have them. And believe me, I came to this group. I didn't come to the group with problems, but there were some things that evolved in my church life that were really identified as major challenges. And I did bring those to the table. What we don't assume that we're going to solve each other's problems. We just listen and try to support and help the other person understand as fully as they can those things that we may see before they do. But every now and then problem solving does occur, but I think it just kind of breaks out randomly as opposed to being the goal of our time together. And I think that's really critical to say. The crisis that I experienced, and this was a few years into my ministry with this church, I'm not going to go into details, but if any of you have ever been in a group where you felt like there was a group within the group that was really out to get you and would be very happy to find a way to chase you out the door, that's what I was working with, essentially. And I've learned a lot about myself in that experience, and it's one of the wonderful things about the crucible of church work, how much it can teach us about ourselves if we're willing to really be reflective and try to be aware and live in the present moment and actually see what's going on and not just what we're projecting or what we think is going on, because that's what we've experienced in the past. So in this experience, I really was, I don't think I would have stayed necessarily with the church had I not had this group of people to talk to. It got that hard, and I was, if any of you are familiar with the Enneagram, I'm sure there are other psychological spiritual systems that are similar, but that's the one I've worked with positively for a long time. you kind of exist on certain levels. And if you're doing really well, you behave this way. And if you're falling back and in a crisis mode, you often revert to behaviors that you learned early when you were becoming a human being that you maybe let go of a long time ago. But when you're desperate, you kind of retreat back to these strategies. And I was very much in a position where I had retreated back, and I was very fearful, and my confidence had been pulled out from under me, and I just wasn't sure what to do. And I didn't get answers necessarily from this group, but oh my God, was it powerful to be able to talk it all through, to have nobody, telling me that, well, I clearly think you're wrong here, or I clearly think, these people are crazy. There wasn't a judgment going on about the participants in this church struggle. There was just try to find out what's happening. How can you listen? How can you be present? And that stuff helped me so, so much. I have a wonderful partner, been married for many years. And, she was a great help in this too. But it was really talking with this other group of clergy that more than anything else, not just helped me get through it, so to speak, but helped me decide that I was still called to this church, and I was probably going to have to stand up for myself and piss some people off, if I wanted to claim my space and continue to be the pastor of this church. That was what I did. I'll never forget the day I left the meeting and came back to a major meeting at the church that was about this crisis, and I won't go into details there either, except that. I basically told everybody I couldn't do anything they had asked me to do, and if they weren't going to be able to manipulate me into the position I felt like I was being manipulated into, and we're just going to see where things fell. And it took a while for things to smooth out, and they didn't smooth out. And some people, of course, left the church because they couldn't get me to leave. But by God, we survived it. And we did survive it. The church since that time has really evolved. And I think somebody early on said, what have you gained from this experience? And one of the things I gained was the ability to walk a church through the process of selling its building and its property and deciding whether or not it still wanted to exist, and deciding to exist, and still being here 4 years later, doing better than we were when we sold the property. And I never would have expected that it was going to work out the way it worked. I walked through that whole experience clearly, with somebody up there holding my hand, and I was definitely the leader of this experience of our church. But I had three women in the church who were very, very active in the process, and I don't think I could have done that as well as I did as a pastor had I not been through this crisis. And had I not decided that I really wanted to be with these people, and a lot of them really wanted me to be with them. So at the same time, that was all going on. This was all really a critical stimulus for personal growth and spiritual practice. And I got much more serious about all sorts of things that I now practice every day. And I don't think any of that would have happened in quite as smooth a way had I not been able to talk this through with my Together Ministry group. A couple other things. Jackie asked us to think about best practices. I have trouble addressing that. Our best practices, I think I've laid out, are to help each other be vulnerable, know that nothing is out of bounds for talking about, and trying not to problem solve as much as be a good spiritual friend and listen and be there for one another. We do have very serious requirements for people that we try to bring in new, which we've done many times, or we wouldn't still be in existence. As I said, only 3 of the original members are there. But you have to have a sense of humor. You have to be willing to swear, or at least to put up with it, I should say. And you have to be definitely on the progressive side of things, because we're not interested in arguing about theology, although we discuss theology all the time. So we have really maintained with I wouldn't call it a revolving door, but we've, of the 8 people that started, only 3 of them are left. And we now have a group that's probably got 8 to 9 people active on a regular basis. And as I said, we've invited some people that decided not to stay, but generally somebody in the group has a good feeling about somebody and says, I think they might be a potential member. And then we talk about them based on what little we know from this one person's description. And then we extend an invitation and we go for it. So it seems to be working out that swearing, being a progressive Christian, and having a sense of humor seem to be all we need to require of one another. And we're evolving. When we started, everybody was definitely in pastoral work. And now we have some people that are more chaplains than they are pastors, although some of them are sort of hybrids. And we've talked about that. We weren't sure that, what's going to happen to our group if everybody's not a pastor. And we had great discussions about this, and we decided that we would see how it evolved rather than try to control it. And we wanted to be with these people that are more chaplain than pastor. And it's so far working out just the way it's supposed to. And we're okay to go along for the ride and not be in complete control. One of the things we really miss since we went on to Zoom is, I think Zoom's amazing. And actually, the church I work for is doing better on Zoom than we were doing when we were still meeting in the sanctuary. And I mean better in many ways. I'm not just talking about numbers. Really significant stuff going on that I'm still trying to understand. And I hope God gives me the insight to understand it, because it's clearly very important. But we'd always go out to lunch afterwards and we'd talk about movies and sports and things a little bit less serious. And Son of a Gun Monday, at our last meeting, we could tell that the serious topics had sort of faded out. Everybody had had their say. And our fearless leader, who's really good at leading in a very subtle way, said, well, if anybody wants to talk about sports, or movies, we've probably got a little time here. And we went for it. And I have a feeling we're going to try to reserve about 10 minutes out of our long meeting time. I think we meet for 2 hours generally. We're probably going to reserve some time at the end so we can talk sports and movies in the future, because we really enjoyed doing it and we'd miss doing it. And now we just realized we could do that too on Zoom. It won't be the same as sitting around the restaurant. What have I gained? I've said everything I needed to say according to my notes. So Mr. Kessler will pause there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And what a gem you found. I just think what that would have been like to try to walk through by yourself, and how difficult a journey that would have been for you.
I could well have been in that 85% I would have been well after 5 years, but I'd be in that 90%. It never would have made it to retirement, that's for sure. Yes.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for also being vulnerable with us and sharing so much of your story. We appreciate it. Before I turn to Dan, Dan, I would like for you to share a little bit about how Together in Ministry has been part of the Ministers' Council. I don't actually know if we're preaching to the choir here, if many of you are part of small groups, or if you're considering a small group, but let me just share a little bit with you. So there was the 2007 study from Duke University that said 85% of ministers will burn out in the first 5 years and 90% won't make it. Then in 2013, Matt Bloom, in connection with University of Notre Dame, published some findings that he did in flourishing ministries. And what they were looking for, it was to identify necessary elements to be implemented in a minister's life that would offer them the best chances for them not only to thrive in ministry, but to flourish in ministry. And there was even a little part where they talked about like thriving at the expense of happiness. So they changed this idea of thriving to this idea of what it means to flourish in ministry. And he found in his research and in interviewing several pastors that those who seemed to be flourishing in ministry had 4 things in common. One, they had pastoral agency. They had opportunities and freedom to take personal responsibility for their own growth and their development within their congregations. They had the power of clergy peer groups, and felt that in order to overcome their sense of personal and professional isolation, which is what often happens, and Carol and Rick both mentioned it, this sense that you get too busy to find time to be part of these groups. I don't think many pastors choose to isolate themselves. I think we find ourselves lost in our work and unable to find ways to reach out. or even able to see over the pile of paperwork and ministry duties in front of our desks to even know where to go next. So to overcome that isolation, they were in committed, covenanted ministry groups with friends and colleagues. That in their first few years of ministry, they were able to create habits that would carry them on. That includes peer groups. It also includes kind of this plethora of mental health practices. And also then that they had this ongoing learning and opportunities for renewal. And so before kind of connecting these things for you, the Ministers' Council is also committed to these 4 things. They just do it in the 3 C's: collegiality, competence, and centeredness. Those 4 things can be found in those 3 C words: collegiality in small groups, the competence, the agency and the need and support for ongoing renewal and opportunities for education, and centeredness, this need for sabbatical and for refreshing. And so these small groups, the way that we have been able to support you being in small group is also that we have grants that your small group can use toward ongoing education, toward renewal and sabbaticals, things that you do together as a small group that can also highlight the centeredness and the competency within that small group can be found in this Together in Ministry program that also brings you together in collegiality. And so Dan, I wondered if you would share just a little bit about the history of Together in Ministry within the Ministers' Council and kind of the things that are living with you as someone who has worked in it for the last 3 years. Would you mind unmuting for us, Dan? I'm sorry.
Here we go. Now we're rolling. I was going to make an observation about Brother Kessler's small group experience, if that's all right. He was talking about toward the end of his times together with him, they started talking about sports. He mentioned that sometimes there might be cursing going on. I would think that maybe if they're talking about sports, that might be the time that could happen. Not that I encourage it, but I could see it happening. So anyway. I'm glad to be a part of this. Jackie and I have been doing these Thursday night webinars for a good little while now. And she's just not going to leave me alone. She's got me back again doing this. So that's all right. I'm glad to be here with you all tonight. I think a lot of folks have probably heard me talk about how TIM groups got reestablished within National Ministers Council. You know, TIM ministry and it goes by, several different names, has been a part of Ministers Council long before I was an American Baptist. Years ago, back in the 90s and before, it was a pretty solid piece of what American Baptist ministry and pastors were all about. But somewhere through the course of time, it kind of got put on the back burner. And that's a sad thing. And so just a few years ago, like 3-4 years ago, Ministers' Council from a national level and every form of it was kind of at a crossroads. And we were struggling to find new identity. Where do we go from here and all that sort of thing. And I was reading some encouragement from Doug Harris, our former national president, gave in regards to his vision to see TIM ministry get reestablished, and it just kind of hit a nerve with me that this was something that I thought could really play a significant piece of reaffirming the significance of how small group ministry can help a pastor, and how part of our goal at National Ministers Council is to help pastors connect, encourage, and find support and encouragement from one another. Several years ago, while I was still serving on our Indiana-Kentucky Region Board, it occurred to me that there was a passage of scripture that I thought really identified what Ministers' Council's purpose was. And it's in Ephesians 4, verses 11 and 12. And it talks about, and Paul talks about First, he identifies these different people in ministry. Some are apostles and prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. And he talks about what their purpose is, why we are called to ministry, and that is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. So let's be clear. Our first purpose is to lead people to Christ, to build the kingdom of God. But once they're saved, our purpose is to disciple them, to grow them, to teach them, to train them, to develop them. And that as ministers council folks, we want to partner with them in that purpose, to help them to be effective in reaching their congregations, to build up their congregations and all that sort of thing. But when you read between the lines, Paul makes this clear separation, if you will, between those in ministry and those in their congregations. And that our purpose is to encourage and disciple and develop them, not to be their buddy, right? Not that we can't have friends in the church, not that we can't find encouragement from the church, but we have to be careful about that because it's a slippery slope if our main source of encouragement and support are the very people that we're trying to serve and lead and equip. There's got to be a better way for pastors to find the support encouragement that they need. And that is from other pastors, others in ministry who are in many ways going through the very same things that we are, especially in the middle of a pandemic, which I think personally has affected those in ministry more than most of them would ever want to admit. I think that it's challenging, and this lack of control and being able to do all the things that we normally do, and we've really had to renegotiate a lot of the practices and habits and maybe even our strengths. We've had to do some transitional stuff, and it's hard, and we need encouragement and support from others walking those challenges like we are. Part of the problem is that a lot of times we feel isolated. We feel like, we're in a small community. No one really understands. Can't really go to my people with personal problems. What do I do? So part of, I think, why we are here in Ministers Council is to help that process, to help people find others, maybe close to them, maybe on the other side of the country, but they have connection with, and they can find a way to find support from. And this is where Tim Ministry really comes into play. That there are others that would love to be and need to be and are hungering to be a part of a group that is really talking about these things on a personal level, and the challenges that we find and the frustrations that occur and even the small victories that happen, that we're not alone, and you're not alone. And so the challenge is to say to them, here's how you're not alone. Here's so-and-so, they're an hour away, but it's worth making the intentional decision to partner with them, once a month, twice a month, once every 2 months or 3 months, and get a little bit of feedback and get a little bit of, attaboy, and you can do it, and we'll pray for you, and all those things that go along with it. So I think that's why Tim Group Ministry is such a huge piece to what those in pastoral ministry or ministry of some kind, need in order to thrive, especially during the kind of year that most of us have.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate that, the history and your emphasis on this deep need for people to be connected. And so several of you, maybe you're already part of a small group, then let us support you by offering you the opportunity to submit an application for a grant that your group can use for educational purposes, for sabbatical purposes, for whatever gives your group life that will keep you connected. If someone's needing a Zoom account, if that's something that your group needs to be able to be online longer than 45 minutes, then that's something that our grants can help you with. If you're looking for a group, if you're not connected to a small group, you can email us and we'll try to connect you to somewhere, to a group that's close to you. If there's not one, the gift of Zoom that we've learned in this really difficult virtual pandemic time is that you can actually be part of a small group, a meaningful group of other ministers who live nowhere close to you. And so one of the small groups that I'm now newly a part of, I have people in my small group from New York to New Mexico, and I think one other North Carolinian, and that's it. And it has been such a gift, not only to be in ministry with them, but to learn from experiences of people doing ministry outside of North Carolina. And so my life has been so enhanced by those relationships, and we would love to connect you in those ways. And so please let us be a resource for you. That is what we are here for, is to support you, to love you, to journey with you. We have a little bit of time. Do you have any questions for any of our panelists? Or I know Randy is still here. Jackie's not well. And so being on Zoom when you're not well is even harder. So we told her to go get well. And so she's not with us right now, but Randy or Dan or Carol or Rick would be happy to answer questions, or I would. And if you'll just remember to unmute. I know it's the...
There we go. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think we were all automatically unmuted at the beginning. I just wanted to know if you can provide some contact information. I'm actually in the Great Rivers region of ABC, and so Berwyn, and I know Jackie, having the two of us were on the same retreat together last year, and that's really where we were deeply connected. But I don't have the contact information other than Jackie. So I would love to start one of these groups, and had it in mind with former students actually that I know have not been a part of a group.
So what I'm going to include in this is my direct email address, but also what I'll email to you if you email me and you'd like more information. The things I'll email to you are the application, which right now is a hard copy that you print out and fax back. But we are in the process of putting one in Google Forms so that you could submit it also that way, which we know is a little bit easier for most. And Lisa's contact, who is, yeah, Dan, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I think we want to distinguish between Tim, groups that are already going,
Yes.
maybe that are thriving, maybe that are struggling, and those who want to launch a group. And I put on some resources and some helps that hopefully can direct a person who may feel isolated, may feel like I'm not a part of a group, but want to be. And I hope that stuff's still on the website or accessible, because I think those who recognize the need for that but don't have it yet, hey, be the go-getter, be the person that has the vision that says, hey, we can do this. And I believe that there are others looking for that kind of support too. And we really want to invest in those folks and to steer them in the right direction so that they can have a successful launch of a new group.
Yes, thank you.
And I would reiterate what Lynn was saying also, Jill, that if you contact Lisa, our coordinator of ministry services, through the Ministers Council website, you can find her information. She will provide that information for you as well. So between Lynn and Lisa, that would be our system.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we're coming close to the hour, and first of all, I want to say thank you, Lynn, and Dan, for your commitment over the years, and Lynn for stepping in and bringing a different perspective and some new passion to this. And you know, many of us were involved with the TIM groups that took place many years ago when there were thousands of dollars available. And we had lots of TIM groups growing at that time. But as soon as the money was gone, a lot of the TIM groups collapsed. But there are those groups that have continued to survive and thrive and flourish beyond what the grants were designed for, which is really what our goal would ultimately be. Is the funds that are available now are, they're seed funds to try to help facilitate those kind of groups. And so we hope that you will make access an application for them, and we will do what we can to help facilitate that. I will add that I think a new chapter of Ministers' Council is going to be looking at funding Sabbaths, sabbatical rests, and personal retreats, and some kind of spiritual direction kind of relationships. And that's, pray for us as we move in this direction as well. It's exciting, and we're wondering how this is going to all move. Just as a couple final announcements, and I have to give a shout out to Bonnie Bell. It's so wonderful to see you here after these years. And Mike Harvey is with us, and these are dear friends that date back to the 70s. So before there were any TIM groups, but they have been part of the foundation that has provided, at least for me, the substance and the strength to go into ministry for years and to finish it. And I'm thankful for their friendship over those times. By way of announcements, Jackie would want us to be aware of. We have approved the Code of Ethics, a draft of the Code of Ethics that we are sending out to local chapters. And if you are interested in being part of the learning guide or interested in having the Code of Ethics come into your local regions, local chapters, please contact Jackie or contact me through the Ministers' Council. Secondly, I want to remind you that next month, Ministry MC Live, this event, will host Reverend Erica Van Brackle, who is now directly involved with ABHMS's Ministry Life program. And she's going to do a tutorial with us and help us walk through that maze that for some of us seems so daunting. For our younger ones, they catch on pretty quickly, but the old timers, we're still trying to learn this stuff. So it's good to have her, and she's willing to help walk us through and provide some clarity. That is on March 18th, and it'll be at the same time slot that we've had today. Lastly, next Tuesday, we began a series of Lenten presentations. At 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Jackie and Rebecca Driscoll will be doing the morning prayers. And in the evening at 7:30, there will be a Bible study that will be involved every Tuesday evening and every Tuesday morning. So if you are interested in being a part of that time, we would invite you to walk with us in this journey of Lent. So I want to say thank you for planning for this time and being with us today. And I think we'll close now with any final words from Lynn, and she'll close us with prayer then as well.
Thank you. Just a thank you for all of you for being here as we talk about small groups, what a gift it is to gather together, even virtually, or maybe especially virtually, because I think most of us would not be in the same space otherwise. And so just what a gift it is to be with all of you tonight. A special thank you to those who joined us, for Carol, for joining us from your vacation with your family. Dan, thank you for coming back and continuing to support the TIM groups. And Rick, thank you so much for your vulnerable sharing this evening. I'm so grateful for all of you. If you will just close with me in prayer. God of abounding grace, we give thanks for this holy time together, for holy virtual ground, for shared space, for space that covers miles and distance and that brings us to one another in community in ways that otherwise we might not have crossed paths except for in this hour. Open our hearts to your love found in each face here on this screen. Open our minds to the way that your Spirit continues to move us to audacious love in the world. Open our hearts, God, always to the ways that we might see your face in those around us, to the ways that we might experience your presence in unexpected places. We give thanks, God, for your always present, ever covering love. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much. I hope
Go
you
in
have a good
peace.
evening.
Good evening.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Laura. Maybe if I get back up to Boston or in that area sometime. I know it seems like you've moved since then, right?
I'm in Indiana now. Yep.
So, well, I can't wait to tell Darren that I spent an hour with the two of you together, and to tell both Darren and June that now I've gotten to meet you too. I was just telling my wife today, you'll never believe I met someone who knows Darren and June. So there's just one more sister for you to meet, Carol.
That's right. There's only one more. I want to hear the story of this family that produced 3 such amazing women, and I'm sure a 4th.
Well, hopefully we'll get to spend some time together. So you all enjoy. I would love to have my family together. So I'm a little bit envious, and I hope that you all have the best time.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Have a good night.